The desert afternoon hung heavy with heat as Barlow tightened the worn leather cinch around his mule, Old Rust, the strongest and most dependable creature on his ranch, a mule that had carried him across storms, flash floods, and lonely trails where only the brave or the foolish dared to ride. Clay had planned to haul feed before sundown, but fate had other ideas. As he lifted a sack of grain, he heard frantic breathing behind the rocks near the trail. It sounded too quick, too light to be a grown man. Clay set the sack down slowly and approached with caution, hand hovering near his holster. When he rounded the edge of the boulder, he froze at the sight before him. Two young Apache girls, both dusty, exhausted, and trembling with fear. Their cheeks were streaked with dried tears, their woven dresses torn from running. One couldn't have been more than 15, the other maybe 12, and their dark eyes darted around as though expecting their nightmares to come galloping after them. "Please," the older one whispered, voice shaking. "Soldiers. They took us because of our father." Clay lowered his hands as a show of peace, his heart tightening at their terror. They explained in trembling. Breaths that soldiers from the nearby fort had accused their tribe of crossing government land and had captured them as leverage, human bait to force their father, a respected Apache chief, into surrender. But they had escaped at dawn, running for hours until their feet bled. Clay listened, jaw tightening with every word. Whatever the disagreements between settlers and tribes, he had no patience for cruelty against children. But helping them would make him an enemy of the soldiers, and the West never forgave men who stood in the way of the army. Still, when the younger girl whispered, "They will find us before sunset," something inside Clay hardened with resolve. That was when they glanced toward Old Rust. "He is strong," said the older sister. "If we can ride fast, we may reach our people." Clay hesitated, feeling a lump form in his throat. Rust wasn't just an animal. He was the closest thing Clay had to a partner. But as he looked at the girls, desperate, exhausted, defenseless, he knew what he had to do. He unhooked Rust's reins and placed them into the girl's trembling hands. "Take him," Clay said. "Head east for the canyon. Keep low in the ravine. Rust'll carry you safe." Rust brayed softly, turning his head toward Clay like he understood this was goodbye. The girls mounted, clinging to the mule's thick mane, and with one last grateful look, they kicked off into a full gallop, disappearing into the dust. Clay stood alone in the open clearing, the silence around him sharp as a blade. Minutes later, the world erupted in thunder, hoofbeats pounding, soldiers shouting, rifles glinting in the sun. The commander rode up, eyes blazing. "Rancher, seen 2 Apache kids pass through here." Clay forced his face into calm neutrality. "Can't say that I have." The commander leaned forward, searching Clay's eyes. "Tracks say otherwise." Clay shrugged. "Tracks say a lot of things." The soldiers scanned the area, curses flying as they realized the mule's trail headed somewhere. The heavy horses couldn't easily follow. The dunes, the rocks, the narrowing ravines, they all favored Rust's nimble hooves. Enraged, the commander barked orders, and soon the dust cloud of their pursuit faded into the horizon. Clay exhaled slowly, knowing what he had just risked. Helping those girls meant he had crossed a line, the kind of line that could get a man jailed, beaten or worse. But it was done. He could only pray the mule carried them far enough, fast enough. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in burning gold, Clay leaned on a fence post, feeling the first stirrings of dread. Word would spread. Soldiers would remember him. But deeper than that was another worry, one he hadn't dared speak aloud. When the Apache chief learned what Clay had done with his daughters, would he see Clay as a protector or a meddler who interfered with tribal business? That answer, Clay suspected, was racing toward him on the wind, for the West had a way of sending back consequences. Long before a man was ready to face them, the desert twilight washed the land in deep, orange and purple as Clay stood outside his barn, trying to steady the unease growing in his gut. The soldiers had ridden off, but the silence they left behind carried a new tension, one that prickled. Clay's instincts like needles. A soft tremor hummed through the ground, faint at first, then stronger, then unmistakable. Clay turned toward the horizon, and his heart clenched. A line of riders appeared through the settling dusk, silhouettes rising out of the swirling dust clouds, dozens of Apache warriors on horseback, approaching with deliberate, unified purpose. Their formation was tight, their horses disciplined, their spears and rifles reflecting the last fire of the sunset. At their center rode a man whose presence alone could silence thunder. Tall, broad-backed, wrapped in a beaded buckskin coat, his war bonnet cascading over his shoulders in feathers that seemed to shimmer with the dying light. This was the father of the girls, the Apache Chief, a man feared, respected and spoken of in hushed tones across the territory. The riders encircled Clay with precision, their faces unreadable beneath paint and shadow. Clay felt the weight of 100 eyes on him as the chief dismounted, landing with a heavy thud that echoed like judgment. He stepped closer, his gaze sharp and unreadable. Clay didn't reach for his weapon. Doing so would mean death. Instead, he stood still, hoping that what he had done for the girls would speak louder than the danger surrounding him. The chief stared at him silently for several tense seconds before speaking. "My daughters told me," he said, voice low and resonant, "that a rancher gave up his best mule so they could flee from soldiers." His tone wasn't gratitude yet, just an observation. Clay nodded slowly. They needed help. Soldiers were closing in. I couldn't just watch. The chief's eyes glinted as though measuring the truth inside Clay's soul. "You risked your life for children who were not yours," the chief said. "White men do not often do this." Clay held the man's gaze. "Right is right," he said simply. The chief stepped even closer, the air between them charged with unspoken meaning. Clay felt the strength of the man's presence. He was a leader, forged through hardship, one who understood sacrifice intimately. "You gave them your mule," the chief repeated. "Your strongest." "Rust is fast," Clay said softly. He got them where they needed to be. For the first time, something softened in the chief's stern expression. "The mule returned to us," he said. "Tired but proud," a breath Clay hadn't realized he'd been holding escaped his chest. The warriors around them shifted, their tension loosening, like pulled bowstrings being slackened. The chief gestured to one of his men, who led forward a magnificent paint horse, sleek, muscular, adorned in beadwork and leather too fine to be mistaken for anything but a gift of honor. "For the mule you gave," the chief said, "and for the blood you saved." Clay blinked, stunned. "I didn't help them for reward." The chief nodded slowly. "That is why you deserve one." He placed a hand on Clay's shoulder, a gesture of respect that carried enormous weight. "My people will remember your name when the sun rises again." With that, the Apache riders parted, giving Clay a path through their ranks. As he mounted the beautiful horse, he saw Rust grazing peacefully in the distance among the Apache camp. Safe and content, Clay felt a swell of emotion, relief, pride, humility. In a world ruled by fear and conflict, a simple act of sacrifice had built a bridge where no one expected one. As the Apache riders melted into the dusk, Clay rode toward home, knowing this moment would become part of the land's whispered legends. And as he disappeared down the trail, he hoped those who heard this story would choose courage and kindness, even when danger stood at their doorstep.